It was a cold Friday evening in late October, when Ethan Blackwell tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The city lights blurred past the windshield as his black luxury sedan rolled slowly through downtown Ravenport. Traffic was light, the streets glowing under neon reflections after a long rain. Beside him sat Lena Whitmore, his fiancée, elegant, poised, dressed perfectly for the charity dinner they had just left. To anyone watching, Ethan's life looked flawless. 36 years old. Founder and CEO of Blackwell Holdings, a billion-dollar investment firm, engaged to a woman the media loved. Everything exactly as planned. Are you all right? Lena asked softly, adjusting her coat. You've been quiet since we left. Ethan forced a small smile. Just tired. Long week. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. As the car slowed near a busy intersection, the traffic light turned red. Ethan eased to a stop, his thoughts drifting somewhere far away. He didn't notice the crosswalk at first. Not until the crowd began to move. And then, he saw her. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Across the street, stepping onto the crosswalk, was a woman he hadn't seen in 5 years. Her hair was longer now, pulled loosely behind her shoulders. She looked thinner, older somehow, but unmistakably her. The same woman who had once meant everything to him, the woman he had walked away from without explanation. Time seemed to slow. Claire wasn't alone. On either side of her were 2 small children, twins. A boy and a girl, no older than 4. Each held one of her hands as they carefully crossed the street, their steps slightly uneven, their faces focused and serious. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The twins stopped for a moment when one of them stumbled. Claire immediately knelt, brushing rain from the child's knee, her expression filled with concern and tenderness. And that's when Ethan saw it. The boy lifted his head, same dark eyes. Same sharp brows. Same unmistakable features. His chest tightened painfully. No. Ethan whispered, under his breath. Lena followed his gaze. Ethan. What is it? He didn't answer, his eyes were locked on the children, on the boy especially, as realization crashed into him, with terrifying clarity. The timing. The age. The face he saw every morning in the mirror. Claire stood up again, guiding the twins forward as the light began to change. She didn't look toward Ethan's car. She didn't see him sitting there, frozen, as his entire world cracked open. The light turned green. Cars began to move. But Ethan couldn't. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as one thought echoed over and over in his mind. Those children are mine. Ethan didn't remember driving the rest of the way home. The city blurred past him, street lights streaking into lines of white and gold, but his mind was trapped somewhere else, 5 years in the past, in a life he thought he had buried. Ethan. Lena's voice broke the silence again, sharper this time. You missed the turn. He blinked, gripping the wheel harder before adjusting the car back into the correct lane. Sorry. I'm just distracted. Lena studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she said nothing more. She didn't know. She couldn't know, because how could he explain that the woman he once loved, the woman he abandoned, had just walked past him, with 2 children who looked exactly like him. That night, sleep never came. Ethan lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, memories flooding back whether he wanted them to or not. 5 years ago, he hadn't been a billionaire yet. Back then, Blackwell Holdings was still a risky startup operating out of a cramped office, with flickering lights and unpaid interns. Investors were ruthless. One mistake would have destroyed everything. And Claire had been pregnant. She had stood in his small apartment, hands trembling as she held a medical report. I didn't plan this, she had said quietly. But I'm keeping the baby. He remembered the fear more than anything else. Fear of failure. Fear of responsibility. Fear that a child would ruin the one chance he had to escape the life he grew up in. I'm not ready, he had said back then, his voice cold, detached, Nothing like how he truly felt. This isn't part of my future. Claire hadn't cried. That hurt him more than tears ever could. She had simply nodded, her face pale. Then I won't be part of it either. And just like that, she was gone. He never asked questions. Never checked back. Never looked for her again. Because deep down, he was afraid of what he might find. Now, 5 years later, the truth had walked right in front of his car.twins.not.child.twoethan sat up abruptly in bed, his heart pounding. Did she know? Did she hide it from me? Or did I walk away before she even had the chance to tell me? The questions crushed him. At dawn, he finally got up and poured himself a drink he didn't need. His phone sat on the counter, glowing silently. He typed Claire's name into every search engine he could think of. Nothing.no social media. No professional profile. No trace. It was as if she had erased herself from the world. The next morning, Ethan went to the office earlier than usual. Inside the glass walls of Blackwell Holdings, everything ran like clockwork. Assistants moving efficiently, executives waiting for instructions, millions of dollars shifting with a single signature. Normally, this was where Ethan felt in control. Today, he felt powerless. During a board meeting, his phone vibrated. One message. An unknown number. Unknown, Ethan, it's Claire. His breath stopped. The room around him disappeared as his eyes locked onto the screen. Claire, I saw you last night. I think it's time we talked. Ethan stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every executive turned to stare. I need a moment, he said sharply, already walking out. His hands shook as he typed back. Ethan, where are you? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared, then appeared again. Claire, the cafe on Riverside. Noon. No images. No warmth. No anger. Just a statement. Ethan stared at the message, his chest tight with a mix of dread and desperate hope. At noon, he would finally face the consequences of the choice he made 5 years ago, and for the first time since building his empire, Ethan realized something terrifying. No amount of money could protect him from what was coming next. The cafe on Riverside was small and quiet, nothing like the places Ethan usually visited. No marble floors. No private rooms, no assistants standing by. Just chipped mugs, soft music, and the low hum of ordinary life. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early. He chose a table near the window, his back straight, his expression carefully controlled. But beneath the tailored suit and calm exterior, his chest was tight, his thoughts spiraling. At exactly noon, the door opened. Claire walked in. She looked around once, then spotted him. For a brief second, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not anger. Not warmth. Distance. Approached the table slowly, her posture composed. She didn't smile. You're early, she said, pulling out the chair across from him. So are you, Ethan replied, standing instinctively before sitting back down. Silence stretched between them. Up close, she looked different, stronger somehow. Her eyes held a steadiness that hadn't been there before. The softness he remembered had been replaced with something sharper. You look well, he said finally. Claire nodded politely. You too. The news likes to remind everyone. There was no bitterness in her voice. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Ethan swallowed. About last night, I know why you're here, Claire interrupted calmly. So let's not pretend this is a reunion. She reached into her bag and placed her phone on the table, screen facing him. A photo. 2 children sitting on a couch, laughing. The twins. His heart stopped. They're yours, she said simply. No drama, no accusation. Just the truth. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came out. How long, he managed. They're 4, Claire replied. You can do the math. His hands tightened into fists beneath the table. Why didn't you tell me? Claire leaned back slightly, studying him. You made it very clear you didn't want a future that included me. Or a child. That was fear, he said immediately. Not lack of care. She gave a small, humorless smile. Fear has consequences, Ethan. The waiter arrived then, interrupting the moment. Claire ordered tea. Ethan didn't order anything. When they were alone again, Ethan leaned forward. I want to be part of their lives. Claire's eyes flickered, just for a second. No, she said quietly. The word hit harder than he expected. You don't get to decide that now, she continued, not after disappearing for 5 years. I didn't know there were, two, he said, his voice rough. I didn't know there were any. You chose not to know, Claire replied. There's a difference. The door to the cafe opened again. Ethan turned instinctively. Two small figures stepped inside, shaking rain from their jackets. The twins. They ran straight toward Claire. Mom, the girl laughed, climbing into her lap. The boy stopped short when he saw Ethan. He stared. Curious, cautious, intensely familiar. Ethan felt his chest tighten painfully. Who's he? The boy asked. Claire's hand rested gently on his shoulder. Just someone I used to know. Ethan flinched, but said nothing. The boy continued to stare, his dark eyes searching Ethan's face, as if sensing something he didn't yet understand. Can we go now? The girl asked. Claire nodded. She stood, helping them into their coats. Before leaving, she turned back to Ethan. I didn't come here for money. Or apologies, she said calmly. I came to tell you one thing. She met his eyes. Don't come looking for them. Then she walked out, the twins following her into the rain. Ethan remained seated, frozen, watching the door long after it closed. For the first time in his life, he understood something with terrifying clarity. Losing them wasn't his biggest fear. Never getting the chance to earn them back was. Ethan didn't follow them, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew he had already done enough damage. He sat in the cafe long after Claire and the twins disappeared into the rain, replaying every word she had said. Don't come looking for them. The sentence echoed in his head like a warning he didn't deserve to ignore. But by the time he stood up, he already knew one thing. He was going to look anyway. That afternoon, Ethan canceled every meeting on his schedule. Inside his office at Blackwell Holdings, assistants whispered nervously as he shut the door and locked it. He pulled up his laptop, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight. If Claire didn't want to talk, he would listen in another way. He started with what he knew. Her full name, her old address, the hospital where she used to work part-time. Most of it led nowhere. Claire had been careful. No social media. No public records tied clearly to her name. No sign of a connection to him, or his company. But then he found something. A rental record. A small 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, a neighborhood far from the glass towers and private schools Ethan lived around. He stared at the address for a long time. That evening, his car slowed several blocks away. Ethan didn't park in front of the building. He didn't get out. He simply watched. The apartment complex was old, brick walls stained by time, flickering hallway lights, a single playground with rusted swings, and cracked pavement. Claire appeared near the entrance, holding grocery bags in both hands. The twins ran ahead of her, arguing over who would press the elevator button. She looked tired. Not dramatic, not desperate, just worn. Ethan felt something twist painfully in his chest. This wasn't the life he had imagined she chose. Later that night, he made a call. I want a full background check, he told his head of security. Discreet. No contact. No mistakes. The pause on the other end was brief. Understood. By morning, the report was on his desk. Claire had left the hospital job after complications during the pregnancy. Twins. High risk. Bed rest. No family nearby. She had worked freelance jobs since then. Night shifts. Temporary contracts. Whatever paid. No lawsuits. No child support claims. No attempt to contact him. Ethan closed the file slowly. She hadn't come back for him because she wanted something. She came back because fate put him in front of her, and she wanted control over the damage. That night, Lena noticed the change. "You've been distant," she said over dinner, studying him. "Is something going on?" Ethan set his fork down. For the first time since their engagement, he couldn't lie. "There's something in my past I didn't tell you about," he said carefully. Her expression sharpened. "How serious?" "Serious enough," he replied, "that I don't know what comes next." Silence stretched between them. Lena leaned back slowly. "You're thinking about someone else?" It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't answer. And that was answer enough. Later, alone in the dark, Ethan stared out over the city skyline. He had built an empire from nothing. Controlled outcomes. Bought solutions. Fixed problems before they reached him. But this was different. For the first time, the most important thing in his life wasn't something he could acquire. It was something he had already lost. And somewhere across the city, two children were growing up without ever knowing who he was. Ethan clenched his jaw. Not anymore. Ethan waited 3 days. 3 long, restless nights where sleep never fully came. On the 4th afternoon, he broke. He told himself it wasn't crossing a line. He wasn't forcing anything. He just wanted to see them again. From a distance. The playground behind Claire's apartment was quiet that day. A few children ran across the cracked pavement while parents sat nearby, scrolling on their phones. Ethan stood across the street, hands in his coat pockets, trying to look like someone who belonged there. Then he saw them. The twins. The boy was climbing the rusted slide with fierce determination. The girl sat in the sandbox, carefully arranging plastic shapes in neat rows. Claire stood nearby, watching them closely. She looked more relaxed here, less guarded. This was her world. Ethan stepped forward without thinking. The sound of his shoes on gravel made the boy turn. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed, not understanding, but instinct. The boy's smile faded. "Mom," he called softly, moving closer to Claire. She turned. And the moment she saw Ethan, her entire body stiffened. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply. "I just wanted to talk," Ethan said. "I won't stay long." "You were clear," she replied. "I told you not to come looking for them." "I'm not here as their father," he said quickly. "I'm here as someone who left." She cut in. The children watched in silence. The girl tugged at Claire's sleeve. "Who is the?" Claire didn't hesitate. "No one." The word landed like a blow. Ethan swallowed hard. "I just want a chance to know them. To be something." Claire stepped in front of the twins instinctively. "They don't need you," she said quietly. "They needed you 5 years ago." The boy frowned, studying Ethan again. "Why are you looking at us like that?" Ethan crouched slightly, lowering himself to their level. His voice shook despite his effort to control it. "Because I think you're amazing," he said. The boy didn't smile. Instead, he shook his head. "You're weird." Then he took his sister's hand and pulled her behind their mother. Claire's jaw tightened. "That's enough," she said. "You need to leave now." Ethan straightened slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I won't disappear again," he said quietly. Claire met his gaze, her eyes cold. "You already did." She turned away, guiding the twins toward the building without looking back. Ethan stood frozen as they disappeared inside. People walked past him. Cars drove by. Life continued. But something inside him had cracked open. For the first time, rejection wasn't about business deals or public image. It was personal. And it hurt more than anything he had ever lost. That night, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a photo his security team had quietly taken earlier that day. The twins laughing on the playground. Happy, safe, loved. Without him. He realized then what Claire had been protecting. Not herself. And for the first time, Ethan understood the truth he had avoided for years. Being their father wasn't a title he could claim. It was something he would have to earn. Ethan didn't tell Lena right away. Not because he wanted to lie, but because once the truth was spoken, there would be no way to control what came next. But Lena noticed everything. The missed dinners, the distracted answers, the way his phone never left his hand. On the fifth night, she stopped pretending nothing was wrong. They were in the penthouse, city lights spilling across the floor. Lena stood by the window, her reflection sharp against the glass. "You're not here," she said calmly. "You haven't been for weeks." Ethan set his phone down. "I told you something from my past resurfaced." "That's not the whole truth," she replied, turning to face him. "There's someone else." Ethan inhaled slowly. "There are children," he said. The words hung in the air. Lena didn't move. "Whose?" "Mine." Silence crashed down between them. Finally, she laughed, short, disbelieving. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." Her expression changed instantly. Shock. Then calculation. "How old?" "4." Her eyes narrowed. "With her?" Ethan nodded. "So let me understand," Lena said carefully. "You built your empire. You proposed to me. And somewhere out there, you have twins you never mentioned." "I didn't know," he said. "Not until now." Lena walked closer, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "And now you're playing family." "No," he said firmly. "I'm trying to take responsibility." Her voice rose. "Responsibility would have been telling me before I agreed to marry you." Ethan had no answer. She looked at him for a long moment, then asked the question he had been avoiding. "Do you love her?" The room seemed to shrink. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I never stopped caring." Lena exhaled slowly. "And the children? They come first." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Lena's face hardened. "So where does that leave me?" Ethan met her eyes. "I don't know." She nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. "Then we're done." He froze. "Lena, I won't compete with ghosts or children," she said quietly. "And I won't marry a man who's already chosen another life." She removed the ring and placed it on the table between them. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," she added. "But it won't be with me." She walked out without another word. The next morning, headlines broke. Blackwell's CEO's engagement called off. Speculation exploded. Ethan ignored it all. For the first time, he wasn't making a strategic decision, he was making a moral one. That afternoon, Claire found an envelope taped to her apartment door. Inside was a letter. No logos. No lawyers. Just handwriting. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I won't show up again unless you allow it. But I will provide for them, quietly, legally, without conditions. And if one day they ask about me, I hope you'll tell them I tried to do better." No signature. She knew who it was from. Claire sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the paper. For the first time since the cafe, her expression softened. Not with trust. But with uncertainty. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. A quiet one. Claire had taken the twins to the small park near the river, the same place she always chose because it felt safe. Open space. Clear sight lines. Nothing unpredictable. Or so she thought. The girl was sitting on the grass, drawing with chalk. The boy was racing another child toward the edge of the playground, laughter echoing in the air. "Slow down," Claire called. He didn't hear her. 1 second, everything was normal. The next, a sharp scream cut through the park. Claire turned just in time to see her son stumble near the bike path, his foot catching on the uneven pavement, as a cyclist swerved too late. The impact wasn't violent. But it was enough. The boy hit the ground hard, his head snapping against the concrete. Crying. Claire ran. People froze, unsure what to do. Blood trickled from the boy's forehead as he sobbed, disoriented, panic spreading across his face. "I'm here, baby, I'm here," Claire whispered, hands shaking as she cradled him. Stay with me. Someone shouted about calling an ambulance. Someone else backed away. And then a familiar voice broke through the chaos. Move. Ethan was already kneeling beside them. Claire looked up, shocked. What are you doing here? No time, he said firmly. He checked the boy's pupils, his breathing, movements calm, practiced. He removed his jacket, pressing it gently against the wound. Hey, he said softly to the boy, meeting his eyes. You're okay? You're safe. I've got you. The boy whimpered, gripping Ethan's sleeve. Don't let go, he whispered. Ethan's chest tightened. I won't, he said immediately. I promise. The ambulance arrived minutes later. At the hospital, Claire paced the hallway, fear written across every movement. Ethan stayed silent, standing nearby, giving her space, but never leaving. When the doctor finally came out, Claire held her breath. He'll be fine, the doctor said. Mild concussion. He needs rest, but no serious damage. Claire's knees nearly gave out. She covered her face, relief crashing over her in waves. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hands shaking for the first time that day. Later, in the quiet hospital room, the boy slept peacefully, bandage wrapped around his head. The girl sat curled up in a chair, exhausted. Claire stood by the window. You didn't have to stay, she said quietly. I wanted to, Ethan replied. She turned toward him. You handled that like you'd done it before. I grew up taking care of my younger brother, he said. I guess some instincts never leave. Silence stretched. Then she asked the question she had avoided for years. If you had known, she said softly, would you have stayed? Ethan didn't hesitate. Yes. The certainty in his voice surprised even him. Claire looked at him, for a long moment. You can visit, she said finally. Sometimes. On my terms, his breath caught. That's more than I deserve, he replied. She nodded. It's not about what you deserve. It's about what they need. The boy stirred slightly, murmuring in his sleep. Ethan stepped closer to the bed, stopping just short of touching. Good job, buddy, he whispered. The boy smiled faintly, still asleep. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like an outsider. He felt present. And that changed everything. Ethan kept his word. He didn't show up unannounced. He didn't overstep. He didn't try to buy his way in. Every visit happened only after Claire agreed. At first, it was awkward. Painfully so. He would arrive exactly on time, standing stiffly by the door of the small apartment, unsure where to put his hands, unsure where he belonged. The twins watched him closely. The girl was curious, asking endless questions. The boy was cautious, always keeping one step of distance. Ethan didn't push. He listened. He learned. On his third visit, Claire asked him to watch them for 15 minutes while she ran downstairs to pick up a package. Just 15, she said firmly. I'll be right back. When the door closed, the apartment felt suddenly very quiet. The girl looked up at him. Do you know how to make pancakes? Ethan blinked. I know how to order them. She frowned. That doesn't count. The boy crossed his arms. Mom makes them better. I believe that, Ethan said quickly. They stared at him, waiting. He hesitated, then rolled up his sleeves. But we can try. The kitchen became chaos. Flour everywhere. Eggshells in the sink. Smoke curling from a pan that was definitely too hot. The girl laughed so hard she nearly fell off the chair. Even the boy smiled, just a little. When Claire returned, she froze at the doorway. What happened here? Ethan looked helpless. We survived. She laughed before she could stop herself. It was the first time he had seen her laugh like that in years. Weeks passed. Ethan showed up for small things. School pickup, doctor appointments, homework he didn't fully understand. He learned their routines. Which cup belonged to which child, which stuffed animal had to be nearby at bedtime, which one needed silence, and which needed stories. Slowly, without announcement, he became part of the rhythm. One evening, as they walked home together, The boy tugged on Ethan's jacket. Why do you come here? He asked quietly. Ethan stopped walking. Because I care about you, he said honestly. The boy frowned. Are you leaving again? Ethan crouched down, meeting his eyes. No, he said gently, not if I'm allowed to stay. The boy studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. Okay. That night, after the twins were asleep, Claire stood beside Ethan in the hallway. They like you, she admitted quietly. I know that scares you, Ethan replied. She didn't deny it. I'm still afraid, she said. Of trusting you. Of letting them get attached. I understand, he said. I'll move at your pace. Claire looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, she didn't see the man who left. She saw the man who stayed. From the living room, a small voice drifted down the hallway. Mom, and Ethan. Claire hesitated. Then she answered, we're here. Ethan smiled softly. He had never owned a moment like this. And yet, it felt like the most valuable thing he had ever been given. The calm didn't last. It never does. One morning, Claire received a letter she hadn't expected, stamped with an official seal. The landlord was selling the building. They had 60 days to move. Claire sat at the kitchen table long after reading it, fingers tightening around the paper. Rent in the city had doubled since she moved in. Every option she could think of pushed her closer to the edge she had spent years avoiding. That evening, Ethan noticed something was wrong. You're quiet, he said as the twins colored at the table. Claire hesitated. Then she told him. Ethan didn't speak right away. I can help, he said finally. She shook her head immediately. No. I'm not offering money, he replied calmly. I'm offering solutions. That's the same thing to you, she said sharply. I won't raise them in your shadow. I won't let them think love comes with conditions. Ethan absorbed the words without arguing. Then let me make a different choice, he said. 2 weeks later, Ethan made headlines again. Blackwell CEO steps down from daily operations. The business world was stunned. Speculation ran wild. But Ethan didn't care. For the first time, his decision wasn't about control or legacy. It was about presence. He moved into a modest townhouse on the same side of the city as Claire, close enough to help, far enough to respect her space. No security detail. No press. No announcements. Just consistency. The twins noticed. You're here a lot, the girl said one night. I like being here, Ethan replied. The boy studied him quietly. You don't have to. I know, Ethan said. I want to. That answer mattered. One evening, months later, Claire watched Ethan help the twins with homework, his tie loosened, his voice patient. You changed everything, she said softly. He looked up. So did you? She hesitated, then asked the question that had waited years to be spoken. What are we to you? Ethan didn't rush his answer. You're my family, he said simply. If you'll have me. The room fell silent. The boy looked at Claire. The girl held her breath. Claire's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. You don't get to leave, she said. You don't get to disappear when it's hard. I won't, Ethan replied. Not again. On a quiet Saturday morning, the twins ran ahead of them at the park. The same park. The same river. Different ending. The boy slowed, then turned back. Ethan, he asked. Yes. After a long pause, he said the word that stopped time. Dad. Ethan didn't answer right away. He knelt down, heart pounding. If you call me that, he said carefully, it means I'm here forever. The boy nodded once. Okay. Ethan pulled him into a hug, emotion breaking through at last. Claire watched, tears slipping free. This time, she didn't stop them. Years later, people would still talk about Ethan Blackwell, the empire he built, the power he walked away from, but the only titles that ever mattered to him were the ones no one printed in headlines. Dad. Partner. Home. Because sometimes, the greatest success isn't what you build. It's who you stay for.